What's good, everybody? I'm Keandre, this is Intellect, and welcome back to the channel. Now, it feels like I haven't done one of these for a minute, but it's finally time to release the final big board of the 2022 NBA Draft. Now, we'll go 70 players deep on this one, with honorable mentions rounding it out to a top 100. And I purposely made this one just a little bit longer to give some more explanation as to why I have certain players ranked where they are. But without further delay, let's go ahead and get into it. Starting with those outside of the 70 we'll talk about in this video, there are quite a few guys I could see breaking through here and what makes this a top 100 in total. These are some of the names you'll likely see on Exhibit 10, Summer League deals, and some two-ways at the conclusion of the draft. One of several guys with familial league ties, Isaiah Mobley never really caught on in terms of conversation as a prospect, but I think he's draftable at the very least. He's a really good passer, has some guard skills at 6'10", he's respectable from 3, and I wouldn't be surprised if he actually ends up with the Cavs at the end of the draft. Ron Harper Jr. has been a popular name over the last couple years, and he's another guy looking to continue the family business, but he's made his own lane as a big body shooter with an underratedly solid all-around game that was great to watch in the Big Ten. I'm a big fan of Texas A&M's Quentin Jackson. I think he's firmly in the draftable mix as an athletic defender with a clear will and energy about him that gets him his buckets. He's just one of those dudes who, if he goes undrafted, I'm on the phone immediately to get him in the organization in some fashion. Murray State's Tevin Brown is also very high on my list of potential undrafted free agents. One of the better movement shooters in the class, he's quick and can make things happen defensively. Another draftable late second round guy as well. UConn's Tyrese Martin was one of my biggest rises from the pre-draft process. From the Portsmouth Invitational to the G League Elite Camp and then the official draft combine, he made an impact, and I gotta be honest, going through that gauntlet and performing says a lot about that player. He can knock down shots, he's solid defensively, and best of all, his motor never stops running, and he might just be this year's Aaron Wiggins.
He will! Oh, what a hustle play!
At this point, it's looking like Jordan Hall will go undrafted, but if you have the chance to pick up a 6'8" playmaker who can shoot it and isn't a liability defensively, I think that's a good decision. He was a bit disappointing at the G League Elite Camp, but going off of his St. Joe's work, he's proven himself enough. Orlando Robinson is a good bet as a highly skilled big. I think his NBA role will be somewhere heavily utilizing his ability to stretch the floor and make plays, and less of the back to the basket work he did a good portion of at Fresno. Defense and athleticism are his biggest growth areas, but he's still got a nice skill set to bet on in the late second or in the undrafted free agent market. Moussa Diabate's pitch as a draft pick is his athleticism and defensive versatility. He's shown himself to be one of the best bigs defending on the perimeter, and in the right situation he could turn into a high impact guy. I think he's a worthy second rounder, but in revisiting him, he's still got a lot of work to do offensively, and in terms of overall feel, that'll take some time. It was initially reported that Nikola Jovic's teammate Karlo Matkovic was going to withdraw from the draft, but he decided to keep his name in it. The athletic and skilled big man does a lot of things well, he plays hard, and shot it much better at the combine than I ever thought he was capable. He could still be the biggest sleeper of the draft, and I'm curious to see where he lands. And Khalifa Diop's energy, mobility, and explosiveness has made him a compelling rim-running big man. He's a likely draft and stash prospect, but what he's shown for Gran Canaria will likely get the Euro Cup rising star a lot of interest throughout the second round. And I still think Julian Champagnie is one of the most talented shot makers in this draft. The 6'8" wing out of St. John's and twin brother of Justin Champagnie of the Raptors. Still one of my personal favorites, but I think he's shown enough over the last couple years to hear his name called. I always feel like I should have Matteo Spaniolo higher. He's a super crafty guard with good size and high level pace and poise in the pick and roll for his age. He has some bumps in the road, especially defensively in his first professional year, but I think he's a top flight stash option in the mid to late second. Go let him get some more reps and hopefully make an immediate impact in a few years. Hugo Besson's shot creating and pick and roll ability shined through this season for the New Zealand Breakers, though his overall decision making and defense left more to be desired. He was much higher on my board earlier in the year, but this general range makes more sense after revisiting their games. Trevion Williams is a prospect that fit might matter for most. If he goes somewhere that's going to allow him to get post touches and make plays, he could be an absolute steal. If he's slotted in more of a traditional big man role or even tries to move down as a wing, I think it'll be tougher for him.
Take a help and stay at home with the switch. There he is. Nice in this tournament, the 3 seed, 1, 2, and 4.
Alabama's Keon Ellis fits that 3-and-D mold very well. Standing at 6'5" with a 6'9" wingspan, good defensive instincts, and the ability to also hit flybys and attack a few closeouts, he makes a lot of sense. He's got to keep improving his body and as a decision maker, but I like his value in the second round.
And he also has 3 blocks.
Colorado's Jabari Walker has a lot of the elements that you're looking for out of a modern 4-man. He impressed me at the combine and actually looked a lot bigger than I thought he was. And while he hasn't had a ton of buzz lately, I'd be surprised if he doesn't have a lot of fans in front offices across the league. JD Davison is a classic upside swing at the guard spot. He's a great athlete who proved himself to be a solid playmaker and a downhill driver, but he has a lot of work to do polishing up his game, especially in the half court, limiting turnovers and working on the jumper. But to me, there's enough there to take the gamble in the second round.
Full strength doesn't matter, they still beat him. Davison down the lane, nice kiss.
At 6'6" with a nearly 7-foot wingspan, Roddy played basically every position for his team, showing off big time shooting improvement, enticing playmaking abilities, and some athleticism that's about as sneaky as it gets.
Brooks on him. He's got to go fast though.
VCU's Vince Williams Jr. was another guy with an underwhelming outing at the G League Elite Camp, and he didn't get the invite to the Combine, but I still think he's a draftable prospect. He's a 6'5", 6'6" lefty wing who has been a knockdown shooter for years, a good team defender, and routinely made plays for others, and I think that's a good recipe for potential success. Outside of Shaedon Sharpe in the overtime guys, I'm most interested to see Peyton Watson's development and draft slot, considering he averaged just 3 points a game last year. There's a lot to like with him as a defender and athletically at 6'8" with a 7-foot wingspan, but he's raw basically everywhere else, and given the lack of minutes, it's hard for me to be confident in him higher than the mid-second. Movie star Michael Foster was actually pretty dang productive at his day job this season. He showed a lot of potential as a sort of stretch big with the ability to make plays and score some inside as well. He's already worked on his body from what we could tell at the combine, and though there are some concerns defensively and with the type of lineups and situations you put him in, I'd still be willing to take the risk and pick him somewhere in the late second round. For Overtime's Don Barlow, I really just wanted to see it against some higher level competition, and for the most part he did his thing at the combine. At nearly 6'10" with a 7'3" wingspan, he's a very fluid athlete with some raw handling skills and a projectable jumper. He's a bit of a project pick, but the upside is there, and given his measurables, it might even be an easier path to success than his teammate Montero has. Now, Andrew Nembhard might just be my biggest winner from the draft combine. From battling the injury on day one of the scrimmages to having one of the best performances I can remember, and then seeing his post-game interview, it all impressed me and made me revisit and more closely focus on him in those Gonzaga games, getting closer to where I had him at the very beginning of the year. He's a floor general, improving shooter, and an overall worthy selection in the second round for teams looking for those abilities.
Running a rub action with Kofi.
I was sure John Butler was going to return to Florida State, and after he weighed in at 175, I felt even stronger about that, but he remains in it as this excellent moving giant wing with great 3-and-D plus potential, and it was hard to miss his activity in the combine scrimmages. It'll probably take a minute for him to get right physically for an 82-game season, but the upside is there. Josh Minot is one of those players I wouldn't be surprised if they end up in the late first round on draft night. 6'9", great athlete with high defensive upside and a motor. He didn't play a ton of minutes at Memphis this year, but he was really productive in the ones that he did play. He's got to keep working on the jumper and adding value offensively, and even as I have him in this range, his ceiling is pretty high relative to it. Caleb Houston still feels like one of those players I should have higher. We're talking 6'8" with a high level sample as a shooter even before college, and a versatile defender with some complementary passing potential. He just had such low lows and later arriving highs, but he fits a lot of what you want on the wing, and he's still young. I still think Walker Kessler is a solid prospect and a better mover than described. Is that a weaker area of his game? Absolutely. But I don't think it's this existential Luka Garza type of crisis that is described, especially given the type of shot blocker and pick and roll defender that he is. He's big, has good touch at the basket, blocks shots at a very high level, and could maybe one day shoot it, though I'm not counting on it.
Gasper to Kessler. Spin move.
There's a lot of appeal with Jan Montero's ability to get shots, especially in the pick and roll, and some of the dynamic nature that he plays with, but when considering his size, some of the defensive shortcomings, and the whole overtime situation, it does get a little cloudy for me. He got hurt in the combine scrimmages, which robbed us from seeing him in that setting, but all in all, the 40s feel about right for Montero. Ismael Kamagate's ability as a lob threat and explosive finisher, combined with what's a solid level of defensive versatility, protecting the rim and defending out in space, make him a good center bet in that early second round depending on the team, and making him one of a few Frenchmen selected in this draft. Now speaking of Sebron, Darion was sorta on the borderline of the top 60 for me most of the year, primarily because of his lack of shooting, but at some point I kinda felt that was overthinking it. For someone who gets to the rim at the rate that he does at that size, can make plays and also defend at a solid level, I'm good taking the risk on his shot in the top 40 range.
Marcel is a guy that could really help if he got involved offensively.
I've seen Alondes Williams go undrafted in some recent mocks, and I think that would be a mistake. A big 6'5" guard who really blossomed transferring to Wake Forest this season, showed he was one of the best passers in the country and got to the rim about as much as anyone not named Sebron. He is older and will need to improve as a shooter to really make things work, but I really like his game. Marquette's Justin Lewis is a 6'6" wing or forward with a 7'2" wingspan who showed great progress as a scorer and shooter this year, and his transformation as an athlete and as a player over these last couple years are great representations of his work ethic. Another guy who made big improvements is Christian Coloco, and his baseline abilities as a rim protector and lob threat with good mobility have him in this spot. He still needs to continue adding strength in the lower body and core to handle certain centers in the league, but I like his game, and he's a potential late first to mid second round pick.
Doesn't want him to play on their heels, even if you're a big man.
Christian Braun has a good feel for the game, really defends, is athletic, and brings an intensity to the game that you always love to see. He showed all of this at KU and at the Combine, and if he can continue to grow as a shooter, I think he could be one of those role players potentially swinging playoff series in the future.
Away from a double-double. Brown!
While I think Italian wing Gabriel Procida will most likely land somewhere in the 40s or 50s on draft night, I'd start considering him in the 30s. He's a good athlete, a capable shooter, and showed some high-level creation flashes, all at 6'7", and is clearly one of the best international prospects. A key piece in Duke's Final Four run and one of the youngest players in the draft, Trevor Keels has the potential to carve out a role as a physical off guard who showed a lot as a defender and quietly as a playmaker. I've been saying it all year, but I think he shoots better in the future than the 31% would suggest, and he remains in my top 40. Kennedy Chandler has the makings of a long-time contributor in this league. Despite being just 6 foot, he's quick, really tough defensively, makes a lot of plays, and really just gives a lot of effort. That Tyus Jones role or path is a good one for him to follow and potentially take even further.
Chandler blows by Thomas.
You look at Jalen Williams' ability to pass the ball in various settings, the way he reads the floor defensively, often resulting in the wild number of charges taken, and also being a solid bet to shoot the ball, and he just makes a lot of sense. I think of his stock similarly as a guy like Jeremiah Robinson Earl last year. He probably ends up in the early second, but there are a few teams in the back end of the first, like maybe a Memphis or a Golden State, that could like him enough to go ahead and take him.
Has to get it out of there, and Williams bails him out. No take.
Wake Forest, Jake LaRavia checks a lot of boxes as a prospect. A 6'8" forward who's a good defender, can shoot the three, play in a few different situations as a screener, and consistently makes plays for others. You'll be hard pressed to find somebody who doesn't want that on their team, and he'll be an especially viable option for a lot of those contending teams in the 20s.
They have not settled. You said nice little up and under the pass.
I'm still a pretty strong believer in Patrick Baldwin Jr. PBJ had a rough go of a freshman season at Wisconsin Milwaukee, you guys know the story, and his family was actually also dealing with some personal matters at the time, which they all deserve some empathy for. But at 6'9" with a pretty shot and intriguing guard skills, I still like him in the late first round area, but I could see him getting as far as the mid-second on draft night.
Dribble for PBJ at the elbow. He'll pop from there and they'll...
As a quick look back at tier 5, these are the start of the prospects I'd most heavily consider in most situations in the late first round, though many of them will likely end up in the early second. I wouldn't be surprised if Wendell Moore becomes the value pick of the early second round this year. There were some big time sophomores that stole the show in terms of the improvement conversation, but Wendell's was just as impressive as a junior who struggled in his first couple seasons. He's solid to good at a lot of things, has size, and I'd expect him to get a decent amount of first round consideration.
And Carroll pops to the outside.
I was initially pretty high on Max Christie, then got a bit lower, but in revisiting him, I think he should be right in that late first round type of area. Now, I was always impressed with him defensively, especially based on my initial expectations. Nice player that could potentially be great value from what would have happened if he returned to Michigan State. Kendall Brown is ridiculously bouncy, has very good potential defensively on the wing, and is another guy with great feel as a cutter and just in general making plays in several different situations. I don't really see him creating too much offense at the next level, but if he can continue progressing as a shooter, as he clearly is shooting 18 for 25 in the star drill, he'll be in a rotation for a very long time. Ochai Agbaji is a bit lower than he has been in the past, just because I like a few others a bit more. He's a good shooter with size and athleticism and took great strides overall offensively. I still think he can get a lot better on defense, and that's part of the reason he is where he is, but he's still comfortably in this tier. Every successful team has a player or two doing the type of things I think EJ Liddell can at the next level. He'll need to expand his game fully to the three-point line, but the defensive versatility, energy, and dirty work that he provides is the same stuff we see from a lot of guys on contenders at the 4 spot. Though he's undersized, he makes up for it a lot of the times with his athleticism, and I'm excited to see where he lands. I think Ryan Rollins is a first round talent that'll likely end up in the second round. The 6'3" guard out of Toledo has a lot to like in terms of pick and roll play, natural scoring ability, and length for his position. He'll need to keep working as a shooter to really unlock his full potential, but the mechanics and ease at which he shoots it are there, and he's on my short list of favorites in this class. There aren't a ton of 6'10" dudes walking around with the offensive abilities of Nikola Jovic, and it'll likely make him a first round pick. Now defensively, he's got his work cut out for him, but he has some of the highest upside on offense as anyone in this range. Through watching all those Arizona games back for Matherin's video, Dalen Terry stood out even more, and then the combine interviews and other coverage of him has me sold on him. Last year's best bet for the if factor was Bones Highland, and this year I think it's Terry. A 6'7" wing who often ran the show for the Wildcats and has a lot to like defensively is firmly in the first round mix for me. I like Bryce McGowan's skill set at that 2 guard or wing spot, and he could very well be the sort of Jordan Poole late first round scoring guard this year. His splits weren't impressive, but I've said it before, his ability to get downhill into the line, matched with some of his creativity on the perimeter, put him comfortably in this position. He'll need to work on his body, keep working defensively and as a decision maker, but he's one I even think about moving up a tier higher.
7% of his shots come from beyond the arc. Good.
MarJon Beauchamp is one of my favorite bets as an elite role player in this class. Maybe he doesn't have the same type of scoring and offensive upside as some other wings, but what he does do as a defender first and foremost, a cutter, and overall complement to winning basketball is obvious, and it's why I have him ranked where he is.
Finds Beauchamp, hoorah!
I still believe in Ty Washington as a mid-first round type of prospect. He's an interesting case of weighing how much the injuries or competition increase actually affected his second half play. The logical thing would be to say a little of both, but that doesn't really help you out either. I just think his unselfishness, quick attack, shooting upside, and solid defense give him a baseline I'm comfortable with in this range. Notre Dame's Blake Wesley is the scouting report I wish we would have gotten to most. He's just a really fun player at about 6'4" with one of the quickest first steps, great confidence as a scorer and playmaker, and a high-level defender. He'll be in the green room on draft night, and deservedly so.
Ripped away by Wesley.
What Mark Williams brings to the table is obvious. At 7'1", 7'2", with a 9'9" standing reach and the ability to protect the rim and be a big-time play finisher, it's a valuable NBA archetype. Outside of Charlotte, I don't see him as a lottery talent. I don't think he brings the potential coverage versatility or playmaking talent to quite get him over the hump, but he's in the top 20 for a reason. Santa Clara's Jalen Williams is one of the best players in this class. His ability to make plays in numerous situations, shoot it, be solid defensively, and do it all at 6'6" with a 7'2" wingspan. He's a little older but also a late bloomer, and someone I'm ultimately very confident in making an impact in the league. We're not seeing too many guards be as efficient as Malachi Branham was this season, and that's with a slower start. At about 6'5", 6'6", Branham showed off a level of excellence from the mid-range in the pick and roll and on catch and shoot situations that are representative of his overall offensive upside. The biggest thing holding him back is his general quickness and defense, but he's well deserving of being in this range. Jaden Hardy is deserving of at least being considered near the lottery, and I think the pendulum swung too far in the wrong direction over the course of the year. I had him a top 5 guy entering the season, so obviously to a certain extent I've changed course as well, but despite some of his early season struggles in the G, Hardy is still a pretty good bet as a shooting and scoring talent, especially considering his progression in the second half of the year. I believe Tari Eason is a lottery pick as a big-time defensive playmaker that also has the size and foot speed to hound players individually. He's not the most polished and has some awareness to work on, but also has some unteachable instincts, and offensively he asserted himself and consistently made things happen for his team in a very much overextended role.
I'd say, oh, nice.
Baylor's Jeremy Sohan could very well end up the best defender from this draft. While he may not have the game-breaking steals numbers like Tari Eason or protect the rim like Chet, he's got elite versatility and switchability, and his positioning and rotations are second to none. Offensively, it's more of a work in progress, but enough for me to put Sohan in the lottery. Ousmane Dieng is one of my favorite prospects in the class. He showed off a great deal of defensive prowess and versatility all year long, but really broke out offensively in the second half of the year and never really looked back. I'd assume he'll be somewhat of a project offensively, just continuing to work on his shot in the places he's most effective as a scorer, but the upside is sky high and he'd have excellent value should he slip out of the lottery. Johnny Davis is another player I'm still all in on. He'll need to continue improving as a three-point shooter and working on adding to his handle, but a good amount of his struggles were due to his situation. At 6'7", 6'8", with great passing skills and defensive versatility, Dyson Daniels belongs at the top of the draft. Now, while I do think he was more productive in the G League than he's given credit and will likely impact winning at the highest levels, I don't know if you can count on him to be a lead guard or consistently put pressure on the defense as a scoring threat, which is honestly the biggest thing holding him back from being in that top 5 range for me, but it's a testament to the rest of his game that he's here. Benedict Mathurin has an easy case as a lottery pick. He's an upper echelon movement shooter, a very good athlete, cutter, ever improving playmaker, and has the tools to be solid defensively. If we're splitting hairs this high in the draft, I'm not as confident in his creation reaching the highest levels, but that's far from ruling out the possibility for a guy of his caliber. Keegan Murray is about as solid a lottery prospect as there is. A big wing or 4-man, Murray put together one of the more productive college seasons we've seen recently. He showed he could affect the game on both ends, making plays with and without the ball, and fits well with most teams. I've gone back and forth about his rank among these top guys and his overall upside, but he's deserving of being here. And his rise from unranked to lotto pick in a few years is as wild as anyone else's story in this class. I think we're going to learn more from this Shaedon Sharpe situation than any other player in this draft, and it could honestly have some ripple effects for other top prospects' paths to the draft, at least in smaller doses. He's been extremely difficult to rank. I still think he's top 10 given his scoring acumen and athleticism, but that risk is there enough to be cautious. It'll take some organizational structure and patience, but it's hard not to be intrigued by what he brings. I still have AJ Griffin comfortably in my top 10. It's important to remember that age-wise he should be a rising freshman right now. He's the best shooter in this draft with great physical tools and creation upside, and it's earned him this spot. Now he has some things to work on defensively. He's not currently the greatest athlete, but I buy his overall potential enough to have him here, and I think if he gets into that 11, 12, 13, 14 range, someone will have a steal on draft night. To me, Jalen Duren deserves to be much closer to the middle or top of the lottery than the back end where he's often mocked. Now some of that has to do with the teams that are picking, but I feel like we too quickly brush off the 6'11", 250-pound 18-year-old that classed up to play at Memphis and showed off his athleticism and defensive prowess in each game. There's also some offensive upside that I'm confident in coming to fruition in some fashion, and that's why I have him ranked this high. This tier was somewhat difficult to break up, but these are for sure the next 10 guys after the top 4 for me. I'd say maybe those last 3 are in their own space, but I didn't want to create another tier or put them with the last group. At number 4, we have Jaden Ivey. He's the best guard in this class and the best athlete by a wide margin. His first step and ability to play in the open court is rivaled by few even in the NBA right now, and it's just about continuing to put everything else together. Most notably the in-between game and more defensive effort and consistency. But he's got the tools to potentially be the best player in this draft, and I'd only realistically say that about 3 other players. And he's actually very close to being in that 3rd spot on my board. But Jabari Smith Jr. comes in at number 3, and he very well may be the number 1 pick. That shooting and shot making matched with his defensive abilities all at 6'10" is obviously appealing and fits with any and every team. I just happen to like and prefer what the guys ranked ahead of him bring to the table more, and think some of his improvement areas are relevant enough to have him here. About as unique as you could possibly get, Chet Holmgren takes his place at number 2. A stout rim protector at 7'1" who can defend some on the perimeter, has the ability to make things happen off the dribble, can shoot it, and is effective at the bucket seems like a combination that shouldn't be overthought as much as it is. He's tough, and contrary to what's sometimes suggested, his job description does not include playing one-on-one with Jokic and Embiid every night. And finally, Paolo Banchero is once again my top prospect and the guy I would select number 1 overall. The guy who is rumored to measure in at 6'10.5" without shoes, that can handle it, pass, has shot creating upside inside and out, and can be a much better defender, just makes too much sense for me to have him anywhere other than first. I did some reconsidering in the middle of the season as he hit a bit of a slump and the others caught fire, but at this point, Paolo is my number 1 guy. And here's a look back at the entire board. Appreciate y'all for watching this one. The plan is to have a mock draft before the 23rd, so definitely stay tuned for that. But that's all I've got for this one. I appreciate y'all for watching this video once again. I'm Keandre, this is Hoop Intellect, and I'm out.
O'Shea gon' be the first, so I'll forever be the second. Who rep Lamar Park is something you ain't got a question. They like, damn, grown up, better than we expect. You can see it upon my show.